Hi, and welcome to the Letter S podcast. My name is Joe Gross, and I'm joined by Anina Jasper Brody, who, like myself, experienced the loss of a parent at a young age. In this series, Anina and I will be sitting down with individuals from all ages and backgrounds, each having experienced the loss of a parent. Join us as we delve into their unique journeys, exploring how they've navigated challenges and found motivation to lead positive, meaningful lives. Together, we'll uncover inspiring stories and valuable insights that can enrich our own paths. I invite you to join us on our journey to spread awareness and hope to those seeking a community and happiness in their lives. Wow, I'm excited for today's podcast. Joining me and Anina today is Avi Proctor. How are you today, Avi?
I am doing amazing, and I think our excitement levels are on pretty much the same Madrigal right now. So let's get it going.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Avi, thank you so much for coming and speaking on the podcast. We're very excited.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, really love to dive into this. Avi Proctor is 23 years old. He currently lives in Neve Shamir in Ramat Beit Shemesh with his wife, Yali, and his daughter. Avi loves playing basketball and spending time with his family. Avi was 8 years old when his mother passed away from cervical cancer, and she was 40 at the time. Avi works in the digital marketing world. He's one of the founders of Israel Gap Year and also of Ready to Ball basketball camp, which he, like I said, loves playing ball. And he might have lost to me a couple times in Shiva League, but we're not going to talk about that today.
I was waiting for you to throw that out, but we will not address that today. It's all good.
And we're just very excited for him to be here. So how is the basketball camp going? I know it's starting soon.
Well, actually, it happened in June in Teaneck.
Oh, the first one, right.
First one, and Baruch Hashem, we're on to the second one, which is about 3 weeks from now in the 5 towns. And it's a great time. Take Torah and basketball and intertwine them together in a way that I think has never really been done within the Jewish community, and we're on the way up, Baruch Hashem.
What inspired you to start this basketball league?
Well, and this will I assume we'll touch on this in the whole bigger picture of this podcast of losing, a parent. My dad really got us into basketball when we were younger. Started getting us trainers when we were young, and my love for ball, along with my brothers, really just grew and grew and grew. And then finally, I got to at a certain age where it was like, okay, you know what? Let's make a parnassa while also giving kids an important experience in all aspects. So that's kind of how we got there.
That's really cool.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem.
So this podcast is called the Letter S podcast because everyone involved in the podcast has lost a parent, and the letter S symbolizes the extra S in the end of the word parents. So throughout your own experiences throughout life, what has the letter S meant to you? Can you share some stories about the letter S?
No, it's a great question. I'll say before getting asked that question, I never really thought about it that much. Growing up, losing a parent, as you said before, when I was 8 years old, my mother was Allah Shalom, was diagnosed when I was 6. When you're 6 years old, there's only so much you remember from that point in your life, right? And we're in the same portion in terms of age-wise of when we lost a parent, but the norm for me, for basically my entire life, was one parent. So that parents of those typical situations, which I'm sure you've talked about with other guests on this podcast, is you go to school and you have parent-child learning, or somebody asks you where are your parents from, or this and that, and it's, for me, the reality was at such a young age, one parent. So I never really thought about I'm lacking, the S there, or it's, my dad was everything for us. And, we'll talk about that also. He just did so much for us from the time when my mother was sick to when she passed away, and, up until now. But it's weird. It's, to answer that question, there wasn't really feeling so much of a lacking. It was just that was the norm for me in my life,
It's really interesting that you're saying that because I was also 8 when my father passed away, and he was diagnosed again when I was 5. So it's all around the same age, and I have grown up having those interactions and being very uncomfortable. So it's interesting to hear the different perspectives on that, because every time someone says parents instead of parent, I flinch, I get very uncomfortable, and I feel like it's a reminder of everything I don't have. But I feel like it's very interesting to hear that perspective.
Yeah, no, and it definitely is, and I think, and I'm just going to say this dafka about your podcast is just very special. Once I heard about this from my wife, shout out to Yali, of course, which which I'll probably mention a bunch of times in this podcast, but it's very special what you guys are doing, how you go through an experience in your life and you're willing to mechazek other people through that in this podcast.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. We think it's very important that people are able to speak about it, but feel that there's, of course, this community where they can feel comfortable sharing anything that's on their mind.
For sure.
Thank you. Yeah, 100%.
So you touched about it a little bit, that when you were around 6 years old, you heard that your mother was going through cancer and, was sick. How was that process? How did that go down? Did your father come into your room and, tell you, and then, you had some sort of reaction to it? How did it happen?
It's a great question. I wish I could give you a definitive answer to that one. It must have been something along the line. I have a very faint memory of it, and I wish my dad was here to answer the question properly, but something along the line of like, mommy's sick, and like hopefully she'll get better, and we don't know necessarily, everything that's going to be in the future. I would say the more vivid memories come what happened towards the end of her life. That was, a lot more that I definitely remember for sure.
And what was that like?
Okay, so I mean, there was my, when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. A 6-year-old kid does not know what cervical cancer is, right. And I'm 23, and I know this much about it, right? But for the first year or so, from what I remember, there was a lot of commuting to go to different treatments, and I never really went to any of those appointments. Of course, I wasn't really involved so much in that process, but I do know for the last, it must have been 6 months to a year or so of her life, she was in California, going back and forth between the U.S. and Mexico, getting different treatments. So we were living in Muncie, and my father was there, and of course he would go back and forth sometimes between New York and LA. And then towards the end of my mother's life, I think for the last, it must have been a month or two, my brother, myself, and my sister, because I have 2 other siblings, younger sister and older brother, we all were hosted at a different family that was like very close to us in the Muncie area. And my dad spent time in Los Angeles. At first, it was like, oh, you guys are going to stay with, your friends for a little bit of time. It could be a week or whatever. And, like, we would call my dad, this is all that I remember. And, by the way, if my dad listens to this and I'm wrong on the details, I'm sorry. But we would call my dad, and we'd be like, well, when are we going to get to see you? Or when are we going to come to L.A.? And then, towards, I think the last must have been a month and a half of my mom's life, he brought us out to L.A. I know my brother and myself, he brought us out to L.A. We had, like a chaperone that took us on a flight there to meet my dad. And my younger sister didn't come. At that time, she was, I believe, 4.5 to 5 years old, something like that. So we come out to LA, and of course, I'm sure people who have lost a parent can relate to this. There's a certain, when you're going through that experience in your life, people tend to either try to spoil you or do nicer things and always be there for you and whatnot. Yeah. So there definitely were a lot of people in our life that were there and trying to make it, a nice time for us in whatever capacity. But we came out to LA, and I just remember, getting picked up by somebody that was a tremendous role model in my dad's life and our sales name, Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz. He deals a lot with people in the Jewish community that have gone through, many different ups and downs. And a vivid memory that I Dafka want to say on this podcast is that he picked us up from the airport and gave us a kiss on the head. And it was like somebody that was there for us to be there. And I'm just trying to think of how many details, I want to share, because I could literally speak for the next hour, and I want you guys to ask more questions. But it was more just towards the end of my mother's life. The last few weeks or so, she was in a medically induced coma. And those were vivid memories of walking to the hospital and seeing my mother, first there when she was able to talk to you, and then coming back again when she was in a coma. And sitting there as a young kid, touching your mom's hand, not really understanding fully what's going on, was like, okay, like mommy's here. My dad would always say she could hear you, but she can't necessarily respond back to you. So I was like, okay. So I would talk to her. I would get in bed. I would cuddle with her, as my grandmother would remind me. But I didn't fully chop what was actually going on.
Right.
And then the vivid day of when she passed away, I guess if you want me to talk about that right now, it was Isru Chag Shavuos in 2009. My brother and I were having a football catch in the front yard at my grandmother's house. And my dad and my grandmother pull up in a car in the driveway, and they're like bawling. And obviously we know what's going on. I think we knew what was going on, but my dad brings us up into the room, and that was the conversation that, of course, I'll always remember. He basically had to explain to us that, like, mommy passed away, she moved on to her world, and life is going to be different from here on out. I don't remember having like a crazy emotional like breakdown at that time. Like, it was just like, okay. I mean, as I said, I wish my dad was here to remind me of what exactly happened then, and I think a lot of it was more of a blur to me now that I look back at it. But that was definitely the memories that I have from the end.
Wow. That is some story for sure. So I have a little bit, of course, because I lost my father when I was 6, and my memory is, kind of blurry. But from what I remember from the experience of when I was told about the news was, I was sat down in the living room with my 2 older siblings, my mother and the rabbi of the neighborhood came by and told us the news. And I remember everyone around me was bawling, of course, crying at such a pivotal moment in our lives. And I was the only one just sitting there in my mother's lap, just not having any emotion because I was 6 years old. Even though I didn't have any emotions at the time, I sort of grasped it, but I understand why I was like that and how I took that on in my life and really understood what was going on there.
Right, and I mean, were you gonna say something right there?
Yeah, but go ahead, please. Go
No,
ahead.
I agree with that point completely. Like when you're at a young age in your life, and everybody that's listening to this that has lost a parent at that young stage, it's like there's only so much you can feel, and it's totally okay, and that's normal because you're you're a young kid,
I think that both of your stories are very similar to mine. I have a twin brother, and I remember my father passed away in hospice. He died from cancer, and it was our second days of Pesach. And I remember we woke up, and my mom was like, his blood pressure's really low. Like, we got to go to the hospital. I don't remember this. Like, I was told this, and I remember, like, little bits. But I remember my brother was like, I don't want to go at all. Like, I don't want to go. And my mom's like, no, like, you have to go. And my brother's like, no, like, I don't want to go. Whatever, thank God, I guess. He wound up coming to the hospice. And my uncle was there, my mom's brother. And he was literally, like, showing us a video of him, like, stuffing a donut in his face. like, trying to distract us. Because my mom realized that my dad stopped breathing and asked us all to leave the room. And then my uncle was trying to distract us because we didn't understand that he stopped breathing. And it was just interesting. Like, I look back at those pictures, at videos of Shloshim and things after that, and my brother and I were so oblivious. We were, like, laughing and smiling, and we just didn't understand. And it's hard because you look, like, at little kids now, and you don't think, like, they don't understand. And I think it's good. Like, childhood is really important, and being innocent is really important. But now, all of us sitting back here, it's interesting to all be like, yeah, we didn't know what was going on.
Right, and I think it's very fascinating that we don't remember a lot of our young ages, but there's 1 or 2 things that we perfectly remember, and it's a little bit of this story. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting how the mind works like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm sure you don't remember a lot, but can you share a little bit about your mom with us? Stories you've heard, if you remember little bits about her, so Joe and I and everyone listening to the podcast can get a better sense of who she was.
For sure. So my mother grew up in California. More of the conservative lifestyle, I guess you could say. No real Frumkeit there so much. The typical going to shul on the on the run, whatever it is. And then fast forwarding more to when she became religious. And this is, I guess, I'll mention this detail because this is an important part of of her life story. She was actually a model for she modeled hair, like she was a hair model. And
I see it's gotten to you.
Appreciate that one. So she was actually overseas doing like a photo shoot somewhere, wherever it was, and then on her way back, she was like, I'm gonna go stop off in Israel, and then slowly but surely she just either it was, I think she found her way into Asia Torah one day, or into some form of a Torah class, like the typical Baal Tshuva story that you hear of somebody.
Great place.
Shout out Ish Gesher, that's where you went. For those that do not know Joe Gross. So she ended up, either she came back to America, I'm forgetting the exact detail, or she just ended up staying for a little bit of time to learn. But she basically became frum through learning in Aish. And then my father, around within a few years of that time, ended up also coming to Asia Torah as well, and then ended up meeting in Israel. But I feel like what's the more important things to take from her life was that when she became frum, of course, as I said before, she was a hair model. Probably the main mitzvah, besides a lot of other mitzvahs that she was so good at, was tznius. And my grandmother jokingly always used to say, or I think she was more serious at that time, but now I laugh at it, but she would always say, you know what, when if you become religious, just don't cover your hair. Like, your hair is like your thing, But that was, she ended up covering her hair, of course, like to the maximum she could, because like tznius was something that was so there for her, and that, I think, is just something so special about her. And of course, what everybody has always told me, that she was one of the happiest people ever, like besimcha, besimcha, besimcha. And also, of course, as you speak about a story like this, memories come back, and I'm thinking of something of when she was in California, when she was having her treatments. We were in Muncie, as I said, with my dad and everything, and we would have like these weekly or daily, whatever, Skype calls with her. And we would put on like these cute little dance shows for her in the living room, and she was always happy. I don't remember a single time when we ever got on the phone where she wasn't smiling, wasn't happy, or whatever it was. And I think that was just something so special. Like having this simcha sachayim was just something that my mother had that I think was so special, for sure.
How do you take those things? That's really incredible, by the way. I'm sure she was I know she was an amazing person. How do you take these things that you know about her, that you remember and hear about her, and implement them into your own life?
So it's interesting. My middle name is actually Simcha. I don't know if that was,
Wow.
So I just, it's hard to say that a lot of things that I do in my life I dafka take from her. I think I may inherently, take things and do it without even thinking that I get it from her. But I just think on now that I'm thinking more practically of like simcha and just being happy with whatever you have in your life is something that I try to definitely take with me. Because there's so many things in your life on a daily basis, and even specifically losing a parent in your life on the larger scale that you could complain about always. And if we decided to go any direction in life in the wrong way, becoming a drug addict, not religious, whatever it is, nobody can blame you. And that's something that I firmly believe in. And going through an experience of losing a parent, like you could either let that make you or you could let that break you. That was just something that I thought of over the years, is that like, and we'll speak about this at whatever other point in the podcast, but my brother and I both went through our stage of figuring ourselves out religiously. And I think I just got so diverted from the question you just asked, but really it's just taking from my mother of being besimcha, and understanding that like her life and the legacy that she left behind, and even the experience of her passing away. Of course, everything happens for a purpose, and Hashem puts us on the earth when the time is right, and He takes us when the time is right. And her leaving, I think, if to be honest with you, had the biggest hashpah on me from the time that she passed away to now. I would not be the person today without my mother leaving the earth at the time that she did. So that, I would say, probably is the most direct thing that had an impact on me, I guess you could say.
On a side note, I just have to ask, because Aisha Torah made such an impact on your parents, and I know your brother went there too, and you decided not to go there, what was that decision like?
Wow, we could talk about this for a while, but as much as I love my brother, he's awesome. I just didn't want to be in yeshiva with my brother, I guess you could say at that time. He was Shana Gimel when you were Shana Aleph, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So as much as I want to go to my own place, make my own path, I guess you could say. So I started with a 25-minute conversation in the base medrash of TBC with Rabbi Avi Schneider, and the rest was history. And I still am affiliated with Shiraga now that I live in Eretz Yisrael, and it's the greatest place ever. Aisha's great too. I'm not, shout out to Rabbi Effie Green if he's listening to this, but it just happens to be that was more my reason.
I get it, and that definitely makes a lot of sense that you want to grow in your own individual way, and with your brother, there could be some problems with that, knowing that I have an older brother and fights do happen, and trying to get in people's ways also happen. That's just the way of brotherhood.
Yeah, I think my brother was also more of like a big man on campus, I guess you could say, and he was very popular within Asia. And I knew that if I, my whole life I lived, people used to call me Mini Mo. That was just not the name that I enjoyed so much. So that was more, I think, the driving force of wanting to go to my own yeshiva and figure it out.
But your brother, did he ever play such a big role in your life over the years that, after your mother passed away? Was he someone that took extra care of the family when everyone was going through all of it?
So I wouldn't say he took Davka extra care, but I think, and if my brother's listening to this, shout out to you, and I love you so much. I think we went through our own stage together, and I looked up to him tremendously when I was younger. So a lot of what he did, I aimlessly decided to follow and do, from figuring ourselves out religiously and Yiddishkeit wise, and this I gladly speak about with people, is that we were not so from, I guess you say, keeping Shabbos and whatnot from the ages of when I was about 7th grade to when I was like midway through high school, and rightfully so. I think I got into that path more because like my brother had more questions, and it was a little bit harder for him, but for me, I just looked at my older brother, and he had such an influence on how I looked at things. And if my brother was doing it, like, yeah, I'm gonna do it too, because like that's sometimes how you look at a bigger brother. So he definitely had a tremendous impact. And also, to be honest, becoming from again, seeing my brother in yeshiva, and seeing how he became who he was again. And for those that know my brother, he is he's a chassid now. He has a beautiful shtreimel and an amazing wife and baby Yisrael Tzvi. They live in Yerushalayim now, and he actually works at Aish still. But really, it's he definitely had a tremendous impact, and he helped me definitely get back more into the right derech, I guess you could say, after going through everything together.
Throughout those years of figuring out yourself religiously, was there ever a moment that you've had of anger towards Hashem or anything towards God that fluctuated your relationship through what happened? You know, he kind of took away your mother. You had some sort of reaction to that towards God when you got to Israel. Was there any type of thing that went on with that?
It's a good question. I don't know if it was dafka anger that I was like, you know what, I'm not going to keep Shabbos now, or I'm just going to use my phone because I'm angry at God. It was more just, I think I was aimlessly doing things without really thinking. A lot of it was definitely following the path of my brother. That might have been more where his driving force was coming from, and you know, having that anger. But for me, it was just aimlessly doing it, and of course, you know, nobody could blame me really at that point. And you know, my father handled us so well. He said, you know what, like whatever you do, keep it behind closed doors, and I give him all the credit. Like I would not be here today for sure without my father and everything that he did for us and the support that he gave us, and just it was, you know, having him, and yeah, that, that I guess that's my answer. You know.
Did you have a moment of, well, you said that you decided to live your life in a certain way. You're going to live your life in the way of this happened and what do I make out of it, which is such a big theme of this podcast. Do you remember that moment where you're like, okay, like this is where how I'm going to live my life? And also, do you know what led to that?
You're saying in terms of figuring out the path that I kind of wanted to go.
Yeah, like instead of like you said, like you could have done all these things, you could have done drugs and all these things, and that would have been valid, but you decided to take this tragedy and make light out of it.
So it's interesting. I would say this, you know, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning when we talked about basketball, is that my father, I think, had a little bit of foresight from different people that helped guide him in helping raise us by himself, literally. After my mother passed away, was that, you know, a tremendous thing to keep kids out of trouble is giving them a good outlet. So from the time I was in like 5th grade, literally, and on, my dad got us personal trainers for basketball, and he, like, you know, put the money for it, and every single Sunday or however many times a week we had it, it was like that was a thing that gave us like a tremendous chiyas in life of like, you know, like we're going to take all of our anger and koach and just put it into basketball, whatever it may be. And like that was it for us. Like if we didn't have ball, like who knows where we would have been, you know. And my brother was really, really into it, and we used to get in many fights in the driveway for him, you know, bullying me, and you know, it was just
beating you every time.
Oh, every time, literally. And I can't wait to play him again because we'll see how, you know, how it works now. But it was just that was it. We really put our koach into basketball, and that gave us an outlet to stay sane. And then later on in life, I would say probably more towards high school and yeshiva is when I really began to have that perspective of like, I just have one life to live. And if you understand that like your life could go like that tomorrow, then you just you live life to the fullest in the best way possible. And I think that kind of shaped everything for me up until now and everything. And in the days when I'm not feeling inspiration to keep doing what I'm doing, whatever it may be, I have that pushing behind me, you know. And I think that's something, whoever's listening to this that has lost a parent, that you're in a special club that a lot of people are not in. But as I said before, if you let that, you know, break you, or you let that make you, that's kind of your decision in certain ways. And you could just take that fire and just run with it, you know, and wake up every single day and understand that, like, it's a bracha to be alive. And, like, if I'm not here tomorrow, like, what are people going to say about me? You know, and you just got one shot of life, and you just got to do it, you know. And it's weird because I'm saying this, I'm 23. I've done so little in my life, but it's just, if you're asking me where the motivation comes from to do, God willing, big things in my life, that's I guess that's where it comes from.
That's an amazing point.
Beautiful. Very important to remember, even if you haven't lost a parent at a young age. Right? I feel like it's easier for us because we know, unfortunately and fortunately, that every minute is a gift, and you really don't know when is going to be your last. But anyone listening to this podcast, losing a parent, not, remember that because it's a really, really important lesson.
For sure.
It sounds like your father played an incredible role in the way that you grew up and your family grew up over the time of the tragedy. And did anything that he showed you, or the ways that he grew, you know, he had, you know, such an ashpah in your life that you take now with you as, you know, you raising your own family now, you know, you have a recent daughter and a wife. Is there anything that you've taken from that you can really implement now throughout your life coming up?
1,000%. Dedication to what's important in your life. When my mother passed away, and my dad told us later on in life, is that people offered him help to basically take us for however long we needed potentially, and somewhat raise us in like a proper household or whatever it may be. But my dad said, you know what? I'm not going to take, whether it's a higher paying job, whatever it is, and I'm going to be more flexible and have a job where I could, you know, work from home or have more flexible hours and just be there to raise my children. And not every part of the story was like, perfect, sunshine and rainbows in every single second of the day, but just the overall bigger picture of seeing how I came out now and how my brother is and how my sister is, Baruch Hashem, just understanding that whatever it is, your priorities are super important, your wife, your family, your kids, and just give it everything you got. Because he did it for us, and if he didn't pick that, I don't know if we would be here in this way today. If he was one of those fathers that said, you know what, I'm just going to hire a nanny and check out, and, I'm going to go make all the money and work a big job, like, would we feel, or would we come out the way we did? I don't know, but I think just the dedication that he had of always being there. And there were years, I think, where he stayed at home on Friday night davening at the house for, to be there just around us and not leaving us, and just, I owe him all the credit for that, and that's something tremendous that I take from him.
Yeah.
What was it like getting married and now having a baby, Mazel Tov, by the way, on both things, without your mom being here?
So that was always something I thought about, of more when I got towards the stage of like dating and stuff like that, because and we could be fully honest about it, there are red flags for somebody that has lost a parent in whatever capacity, for sure. And, whether that's, it could be ranging from, what does this person have going on emotionally, or did they take care of whatever issues they had in whatever capacity. And, Baruch Hashem, I found, the greatest partner in the world, Yali, and shout out to you, because, she'll hopefully listen to this and give me good feedback.
I hope she does. That would be a little bit upsetting if she did.
She'll be the first listener. But for me, it was a little bit of a thought, but I did dating very unconventionally. Yali was the first girl that I dated, and I knew her for, a little bit of time before. So Baruch Hashem, that worked out perfectly. But when I got married, the question is, who are you going to walk down the aisle with? Because now everybody has two parents. And for me, it was like, okay, yeah, I could have done it with my grandmother and had, my grandmother on my left, my father on my right. But I really wanted that moment with my dad. And that moment of at first, right after the Chassan's Tish, when they marched me into this private room, and my dad gave me a bracha, my wedding day was the most emotional day of my life. Hands down, like, the amount of crying that happened on my wedding day, because a lot just comes back to you, because there's a tremendous koach of just like spirituality there, and people always say that the neshamas of the people that passed away in your life come back at the chuppah and the Yom HaChuppah. So for me, it was like I was preparing for it so much, and I was really prepared for it. And walking down the aisle with my dad was a very, very special moment. And then underneath the chuppah, right after we put my kittel on, we had one of the longest hugs of my life, and we were just bawling on each other's shoulders. And the amount of friends that came over to me months after the wedding and said, that got me. Even my friends, like the guys that I least expect to cry, that just got them. And also, my wife's friends too, whatever it was, because it was a very emotional moment. It was like for my dad, I think that was like the climax of like, I did it in a certain capacity. Like, I raised you from the time you were 8 to 21, and now you're married, and now it's time for you to build your own family. But that in of itself was very, very, very emotional and very special. And then also having a daughter now. Like, I always wanted to name a daughter after my mother. Happens to be my wife, Yali's middle name is Miriam. And my mother's, Hebrew name was Miriam, so we couldn't directly do it like that. So we chose the name Ira, which is similar to Miriam. And my mother's English name was Marissa. So Miriam and Marissa, we thought a similar name was
We got
Ira.
a hybrid.
A little bit of a hybrid. And then also she was born during a war in Eretz Yisrael. So Ma'or is, that's the root of the word, bringing light into the world. We thought that would be special. And then we chucked in we added the name Daniela, because we like the name Daniela. So that having a daughter is very, very special. I am absolutely a girl dad, and I love my daughter to death. And Baruch Hashem.
How much on the wedding day did you think of your mother, if you did? And do you ever think about your mother a lot, like every day, every week, or not at all?
The wedding day was definitely there. Multiple times, if not all the time, because that is the day when you lose a parent, especially before you get married, and then you get married, and that's your wedding day. It's like, of course you need your parents there, because you have both sides, and they're helping with everything, and so that was for sure present the day of the wedding. And then you said after, I think about it pretty often, multiple times a week, in conversations like this. Also, I don't have a podcast setting with every conversation that I have with somebody, of course, about losing a parent, but it definitely something that's on my mind and drives me forward.
Are there special things that you do when you think of her, in memory of her?
Yes, to definitely a certain capacity in the spiritual things, I guess you could say. Learning, for sure, doing Le'ilui Nishmas all the time. And also every single year I try to make a siyum on her Yahrzeit for something, which is definitely something I definitely try to do and take pride in.
And if there's a moment that you feel that you want to connect to your mom, is there a certain thing that you do? Maybe it's tefillah or something that you could share with us?
It's a great question. There's a few times a year where I really try to tap into that koach right there. Honor Yahrzeit definitely one. And then also during Yom Kippur, the high of the year, Ne'ilah, wherever it is, I could just close my eyes and just picture. Sometimes I'll just stand there for 10 minutes frozen because I just imagine that I'm, sitting in Yerushalayim because that's where I've been for the past 5 years for Yom Kippur, sitting in Yerushalayim and standing in front of my mother's kever in Los Angeles and having that tremendous connection of feeling like this, koach with tefillah and tapping into that's probably something every single year that I look forward to.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned Yom Kippur because Haruba, shout out to Haruba, specifically has a really beautiful davening. And there was last year in Shana Aleph, one of the rabbis was like talking about, it was right before Yizkor, and he was just talking a lot about death, obviously because Yizkor, and there were 3 other girls that were saying Yizkor also, including me, and he was talking about it, and then I closed my eyes and I saw my dad, and I don't, that doesn't happen to me very often, and I honestly, when I went to Poland also that happened, but besides for that doesn't happen, and it was just a fascinating moment because it's been 12 years and that's never happened, and then in that moment in Yerushalayim, right by the hotel, I felt dead. Wow. Mentioning Yizkor, can you tell us a little bit about your Yizkor, how you feel about Yizkor, and also the Yahrzeit?
So Yizkor is very, very special. I think, what's actually interesting, I don't know how many places do this besides, Torah Shraga in Israel, is that they have everybody stay in the base medrash for Yizkor. And they say, whoever needs to say it privately says it privately, and then, they say the more general klal, things that you could say during Yizkor, whether it's for soldiers or people that died in the Holocaust. So that, especially when I went to yeshivas, when I connected with Yizkor a lot more. But then whenever you go to a shul now, after, that time in yeshiva, it's a little bit interesting because you always get these looks from people of okay, it's time to go out for Yizkor, come with us. Those are specifically the people that don't know you. I mean, they know you, but they don't know specifically your story. So they're look at you you coming to shmooze? That's everybody's shmooze time, But now people definitely get it and understand it. But Yizkor is definitely a time for connection, and the Yahrzeit too. And it's also every single year coming to the Yahrzeit, especially for a man, you have to daven for the Amud and say Kaddish and everything like that. When I'm davening for the Amud, any other day of the year, it just feels so natural, so normal. But then the day of the Yahrzeit, there's just something different. And, it's hard to describe the feeling that you have of, there's much more meaning there. Of, I'm saying Kaddish for a reason. I'm saying Kaddish for a purpose. And it's definitely something special.
Very interesting.
It's also very interesting that your mother is Kever's in LA. How often do you go, if you go any at all? And that's not so easy.
Shout out to my grandmother, Bubby. I don't call her Bubby, I call her Bubs. I don't know if she'll listen to this one, but
hi, Bubs.
My as I said, my mother's family grew up in LA, so she was buried in LA because, of course, it's closer to my grandmother. In high school, I mamish lived in LA. I was there 5 times a year, hanging out at my grandmother's house, doing I loved it, And now, I would say I probably try to go back once a year if I can. I think the last time I was there was about a year ago, so yeah.
Is that difficult for you that you only go once a year? Do you want to be going more or less, or you like the one a year? It's very special every time you go only once a year because the less you go, sometimes it feels a little more special.
So it definitely feels special less often that you go. However, now that I live in Israel and it's a 15-hour flight with a baby, it's not as easy to want to jump on a plane and do it. And my grandmother used to warn me about this. She's like, once you get married and God willing you have a kid, either it's more expensive for tickets, of course, but then also having a kid on a 15-hour flight with a 10-hour time difference, it's not as geschmack. So in an ideal world, if I could snap my fingers and be in LA, I would do it all the time, but it's definitely more, a little logistically harder, but yeah.
When did you make Aliyah?
My wife and I moved there the end of last August.
Okay. How is that?
Baruch Hashem, I went to yeshiva. I never thought before going to Shraga, never thought Israel was a place, or I had a 1% thought of it, and then just something clicked, and I came back for COVID, and there was a burning thing in my neshama of I just got to get back there. And once I was there for Shana Bet, everyone's deciding you go back to yeshiva, you go back to YU, you stay in Israel, whatever you do. And that's when I made the decision. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to figure this out. Whatever it is, finding a wife, finding a job, whatever it may be, I'm going to figure it out. And Baruch Hashem, I'm still figuring it out. But now moving to an actual community, living in Neve Shamir, as you said before. And for all those that are like, what is Neve Shamir? It's Ramat Beit Shemesh Hay. There's a budding young community of amazing.
He wants more friends. That's what he's asking for.
Well, Baruch Hashem, I have an epic chevra, but I do believe that we are all headed in that direction. So if you guys need a place and you're like, where am I going to end up in Eretz Yisrael? Come check out Navy Shamir right away. But it's a great place, awesome community, a lot of people around me, and it's tremendous bracha. And walking through the streets every single Shabbos, just looking around, it's the greatest feeling in the world.
So I know you were really young when your mom passed away. Do you remember anything about your Shiva experience?
Yes, that is a great question. Shiva started in Los Angeles because my mother was buried in LA, and then we transferred over to New York. I have one funny Misa. We were sitting at Shiva. I forgot what day this was, but we're in Muncie. And, of course, my dad was, it was definitely the hardest for him. So he was very emotional. And our house was packed in Muncie. I know people came from all over. And my dad was, like, very emotional. And there's a lot of people there. And then I just look at my dad. And I tap him on the shoulder. I'm like, Abba, stop crying. You're embarrassing me. And my dad, like, giggled. And everybody there giggled, like, a good one. But, like, that was, for me, the Shiva experience was my middle school did a great job. They asked me, like, how, like, pick 4 friends a day that you want to come, like, hang out with you. So they would take 4 kids out of school, bring them to the house. We'd be having a baseball catch in the backyard while, like, everybody's coming in for Shiva. And it's, like, the saddest thing. But, like, people understood. They're like, okay, like, we're, that's our experience of going through it. So that was a Shiva part. I remember, people bringing me all types of food that I love, whether, cookies, cholent candy, whatever it is.
It's the best.
To say it in that regard, yes. That part was fun. But of course Shiva was not. But those were my memories, I guess you could say.
As your father played such a pivotal role in your life, like you've stated so many times, and also the rest of your family, did you have any other type of mentor that you've had, or did you go to a psychologist or anything like that you're willing to share with us?
So it was interesting. I forgot the timeline of how long after my mother passed away. I assume this must have been very recently after. Of course, people always tell you, get your kid psychologist, get them therapists, whatever it is. So there was a lady that used to take me out of class in my middle school and, like, just schmooze with me, hey, give me candy, whatever, just to, like, keep me interested and engaged. But I didn't chop what that really was, which was like, okay, somebody's taking me out to schmooze and hear about my mother or whatever it was. I was a young little kid. After that, like, I think a year or two, it must have been a year or two. My dad, I wish he was here to correct me on this, but I don't think I had any more therapists or psychologists. I know my dad, and my sister, I think, did that a little bit longer. And also in terms of role models, like, there was, people come and go at different times. I think more of just the experience of losing my mom and going from there on in life as I got older was just, like, figuring a lot out on my own. I can't think of one person specific that I could point out. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. I was taken to a psychologist along with my siblings also after it happened for a couple years. My mom had took me after school every day during the week to go to the psychologist or someone really just to chat with. And, we play with toys, we play with games. And I would love it because after every session, my mom would take me to Lazy Bean, the best milkshakes in the world. And it was amazing. I was like, no way, I'm going to a psychologist today. Wow, I get a milkshake? This couldn't be better. And I didn't really understand that I was going to a psychologist. I really thought I was going to just chat with someone and play games because I didn't know exactly what was going on. But there was a reward of a milkshake every day. Why not have a Reese's Peanut Butter Cup shake for, the end of the day? That would be amazing.
There you go.
I also went to a psychologist. I saw someone in school, like someone took me out of class once a week. And again, didn't really understand, didn't really feel anything towards it. But now looking back, I think that played a role in who I was because I think that it's very important to talk. Even if you're not talking about the loss directly, it's important to share and it's important to play. And, like, at home, I'm sure everyone's really sad, especially when it just happens. Everyone's really sad and they're trying to put up a front and act strong for their kids. But also, it's really hard. So I think it's an important, even, like, if you don't talk about it, like, just having that place to go where you, like, play with toys and, like, get milkshakes after, like, it's important. And I think everyone should do that.
Yeah, just to have, like, a little bit of an outlet, just take your mind off it a little bit. That's what I think the main purpose of it was. Just take a little bit away from it.
Exactly.
How do you handle telling people? I mean, I don't know in your life if you have situations where you have to be like, like, my mom passed away when I was 8. How do you handle that? And maybe you could share a few stories about that for you. And also, how do you feel that they react?
great question. I was actually talking about this with my wife Yala a few days ago. Like, and she's picked up on this since I got married. They're like, I don't know if you guys relate to this, but there are people that like I'll decide whether or not I want to tell them that my mom passed away. So for example, in context of a conversation, if somebody says like, oh, like, what do your parents think about this that you're doing? I'll be like, yeah, they like it. And then my wife will like look at me and be like, all right, he's not telling this person. Or like sometimes somebody will say to me, oh, like, what do your parents think? And I'll be like, oh, like actually my mother passed away when I was a kid. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry to hear the whole spiel.
Yeah.
So really it just depends. It depends on what I'm feeling. Depends on who the person is, and because then it sparks like a whole longer conversation. If it's like small talk with somebody, it's just like I'm not getting into it. And
Right.
Yeah.
if they know, they know. Specific reactions, I don't think I have any specific stories on that. Just more picking and choosing who I want to tell.
Right.
Do you feel like when you were in your Shiva, you wanted to think about certain questions more because of your mom passing away when you were little?
And this is something that is a much longer conversation. I more have the perspective of I don't really care, I guess you could. Of course I care, but I don't really care on a certain level to ask the questions because I don't think I'll ever get something that will fully suffice. And we say in Shir HaMalas, this is a vort that I give over to people, we say in the end of Shir HaMalas, Oz Yomolei Schok Pinu. At the end of days when Mashiach comes, we're going to be filled with laughter. Because there's so many things happen in life, we don't understand why it happens, right? And especially when losing a parent, you cannot, there is no person in this world that can tell me why my mother passed away without Hashem.
100%.
Right? So it's like for me to walk around every single day with that question and potentially hold that with me and have questions on Yiddishkeit and tainas on Hashem, it's just not worth it, right? And for me, as I said before, letting it make you or break you in that regard, it's just like it's up to, at least from the way I see it, it's like up to you of like, if you want to ask the questions and try to find people that want to answer them and you're the type of person that has questions that need answers, okay. And I'm sure you'll have people that will, kind of help you in the right direction. Me, I don't care to ask the questions because it's like, that's what happened in my life. That's the lot that Hashem gave me. And obviously if I'm here today and my mother's not here, that's what's meant to be, right? So for me, I'm not the question type, I guess you could say.
And through all the difficulties and all the tragedies that you've gone through in life and all the challenges, you've learned so much. And do you think that difficulty throughout those times, builds character in general?
Absolutely. And it's interesting you ask, or interesting you say it that way. It's every experience in your life is a learning experience, and I've learned this specifically with, speaking with older people. I always love asking questions to older people, no matter who they are. I was playing ball at the 24-hour fitness in Valley Stream a week ago, and some guy, African-American guy, never met him before. We're just playing ball, and as in the middle of games, I'm just like, we start small talk, whatever, and he's like, yeah, I'm 50, I have 2 kids, whatever. I'm like, what's the greatest piece of parenting advice you give me, and I love asking questions to people on that to learn about life, and to to keep growing in whatever capacity I can, and specifically with losing a parent, in the context of what we're talking about, it's there's so much to learn from that, and I could go on a 25-minute monologue right now, but I think you've basically heard what I said before. Is just you could let it be a negative thing to affect you for the rest of life, or you could let it be a positive thing, and it's something that of course affects day-to-day life for me, and yeah, I could give a much longer answer, but that's the Bekitzer basically,
Well, thank you for sharing the Bekitzer version.
I got you.
How do you feel that you relate to death? I mean, you said this a lot during the podcast, but how do you think that you relate to death after losing your mom?
Very interesting. I would say when I hear that a friend lost a parent, I run to text them. I run to call them and then tell them or remind them or just and people know that I lost a parent, and sometimes it's important for them to know that I'm there for them, because there's percentages wise, I don't know what the numbers are, but they're obviously not that high. They're it's a very select club that we're in, and oftentimes you don't know who's in that club. So you could be walking on the street, you could be friends with somebody for so long, and then turns out, oh, they lost a parent too, but you didn't know that for the past 7 years when you're friends with them, because it just never came up. So I would say that dealing with death is yeah. I mean, what was your exact question? Because I want to give a more direct answer.
I mean, what you're saying is great, but the direct question, which you're kind of answering, is how do you relate to death after experiencing the death of your mom?
Good. I'm glad you clarified that one. Relating to death, it's just more I could sympathize with somebody a lot more, and whenever I hear that they went through it, it's just much easier for me. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, because nobody really asked me that question before, which is very interesting. I don't think I think about it any other way. It's more just in that regard.
But you feel more connected to the people. Let's say you, yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
I 100% agree with that.
Same here. You feel that you brought that connection, through Israel Gap Year, that you're able to. I mean, that's at least my my hypothesis here.
I'm cutting you off because it is very nice, the temperature in here. Nobody watching this video can hear, but you are wearing a hoodie right now,
Yeah, I don't
repping
know
Israel
why.
Gap Year, and you are probably schwitzing. So, kolakavod to you.
Yeah, Joe.
Joe was
I
one of
was
my
schwitzing in the
ambassadors.
beginning, and then I guess I kind of cooled down. I got a little chill.
And they
So
got comfortable. I guess, yeah, we're good. What were you saying before that? I cut you off. Sorry.
does that kind of connect to why you were so passionate about Israel Gap Year, that you like helping other people find themselves through what could have been expanded on, and that there was a need for it, and that kind of the way that you grew up with other people helping you out, and what you went through, you can use that and help other people with what they're going through in life too, and how they can find themselves in Israel.
I think more later on, I kind of developed that perspective. Because when I first started, it was like I was volunteering for,
Right.
Phyllis Fulb, shout out to her in Los Angeles, where it was, this was nothing when I first started. Like, it was, I was a shticky yeshiva shraga kid taking videos of my time in yeshiva, and,
Yeah, I remember that.
that was a goofy time, right? Like, there wasn't anything there, no substance. But then after, about probably year 3, once I started making an application for people to apply to be ambassadors for Israel Gap Year, people were giving feedback and testimonials, and I was like, oh my God, like I actually help people make a decision on where to go for Israel. And then that fueled me, because the biggest thing for me is just like, as I was touching on lightly before, like, I'm 23, I'm so young, and God willing, I have a whole life ahead of me, and I've only done so little in my life. But the driving overall force and picture for me is like, okay, like what can I do to like leave a legacy here? Because like that's what it is. Like, understanding that my mother passed away, she left a legacy. Like, there is a gemach, a sheitel gemach in Muncie now, because my mother was so makpid on covering her hair. They did, 2 of her friends, Eloy Nishmas, like made a sheitel gemach, right? For women that necessarily can't afford sheitels, or whatever the whole situation was. But like that, like what is life? It's whatever you can do here to leave the biggest legacy and have the biggest hashpah and touch so many people. Like that's it. So I would say that's probably the driving force for me with Israel Gap Year, and a lot with what I do.
Yeah, that really does sound amazing, and everything you've said today has been incredible. So much advice that Anina and I know can take, and all of our listeners I hope to also. But if there was one piece of advice, the biggest piece of advice you could leave us with today, what would that be?
No pressure.
This is like one of the questions I ask people when I do a
Right, like you
podcast.
said in this story. Yeah.
It's a great question. I'm gonna give one, and I really hope I don't look back and saying I wish I would have said something else. It's just, you got it. You can do it. Like, whatever reason you have to complain, try to look at the positive, because nobody can blame you if you lost a parent, and whatever you are going through in your life, there's 2 ways to look at it, from a positive perspective or a negative perspective, and you can let it make you or you can let it break you. And I'm telling you, and just having the ability to like just push forward and keep going, and like just take your experience and just use it. And I'm one, and of course I handle the way my mother passed away differently than every other person. And if somebody had a much more traumatizing experience, I like, of course, cater this advice to whoever may be, but just whoever's listening to this, like, you can do it, and like keep going and keep pushing, and just understand that like there's a bigger picture here, and we may not understand it, but like it's there, and God willing, one day you'll be reunited with that person that passed away, and it all makes sense. And when it all makes sense, you look back and be like, that's why it was worth to keep pushing, keep moving forward, and we could just stay in bed, and rightfully so, sometimes you can, or just do something gishmak and keep going,
Wow, that's definitely something to think about and implement into my life.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the best advice,
No,
but
no,
it was just what popped into my head,
And I think whatever pops into your head is great advice.
I just want to say also, not related to this, but Israel Gap Year, even though I wasn't accepted to be an ambassador,
Short
I
topic.
just have to say that because all my friends, like, okay, it's fine. But what you're doing with Israel Gap Year is incredible, and I know that it helped me when I was choosing between seminaries. So thank you for all that you're doing with that, and thank you also for coming and speaking on the podcast.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time. This was amazing, and I'm so happy we were able to set this up. Thank you again.
This was a pleasure. And I just looked at my watch and I didn't realize it was almost an hour. So that felt like 15 minutes, and just thank you guys for making it a great time.
Well, that means you had a good time.
Yep.
I did.
Thank you again, Avi.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Thank you again so much for listening to another episode of the Letter S podcast, inspiring one life at a time. Please make sure to check out our Instagram at the Letter S podcast _. If you have any questions or are interested in hopping on a mic with us, feel free to email us at the Letter S podcast @gmail.com. And as always, stay in touch.